Are you looking at the right things? Are you focused on the wrong things? And obviously, you have to convey the point that you're thinking like an investor. My hypothesis is that I try out different things before I choose on what I want to do. And you can't decide on what you want to do unless you go to different places.
Correct.
Say SFM was my like my favorite subject.
Most people are going to hate you for this answer.
Yeah.
He was my favorite too. Hi everyone, welcome to the series Conversation with Kushal once again. Today I have with me a young chap who's working in one of the most renowned private equity funds called as Warburg Pincus. And today we are going to understand his entire journey in terms of what he's done in the past, what are some of the deals he's worked on, what is the work profile at a private equity, and how he ended up getting a job of rupees 90 lakhs per annum at the initial stage of his career itself, which is like one of the dream come true moments for all the aspiring professionals in the private equity space. So thank you so much, Arjun, for taking out time. It's pleasure to have you here, and thanks a lot for guiding the entire audience.
Yeah, pleasure's all mine, man. It's been a while, long overdue.
Yeah.
But good to connect and have a chat.
Absolutely, man. So first things first, let's understand your entire journey. If you could just introduce yourself and what you've done in the past. If you can just tell the entire audience, and then we'll take the further questions ahead.
In terms of my background, so I'm a CA. That's, I think, probably like the biggest turning point. But originally from Chennai, I did my CA and articleship there. Did my articleship at PwC in Chennai. Got a rank in CA final, and post which I joined the Boston Consulting Group as a consultant. Was there for about 2 years, 2.5 years. After which I made the switch to Warburg, and now I'm here for about 4 months now. So that's broadly been my journey.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. I think he's just being very humble and modest, guys. It's been like one of the most inspiring journeys. And how old are you, by the way?
25 now.
Oh wow, 25. So I feel like, okay, I mean, I have to do a lot of things in order to achieve that stature at the age of 25.
But I think you're far ahead right now, so I think that's...
No. Let's divide this conversation into two parts. One is the entire experience at Boston Consulting Group. The second one is the entire experience at Warburg Pincus. So this would be for everyone who are, let's say, who want to apply into BCG, who want to, let's say, get a job profile at BCG or a Warburg Pincus. So not focused only for commerce or science, it's like a mixture of both of them.
Got it.
So basically, let's start with your BCG journey.
Yeah.
If you could just help us understand what helped you in order to get into this company, maybe that'll be very helpful for the entire audience to understand.
So I think BCG or any consulting firm for that matter, like, including McKinsey also, broadly there are two kinds of hires. One is your post MBA roles, and that's, hired from like, the IIMs and, top tier 1 colleges. And then you have your associate/analyst profiles, which are, undergrads, CA hires. So I think the typical profile that they hire is they look for CA specifically, if I cover that first. Generally for freshers, they look for rank holders, or you have cleared CA and have good work ex for 2-3 years. So that's broadly the kind of people they shortlist for further interviews, and that's a separate process. And non-CA background folks, people from the IITs, SRCC, St. Stephen's, etc. I think that's broadly the pool for the associate or the non-MBA folks at the consulting firm. And then you have the entire process of the case interviews. That's a detailed process before you get selected. I think that's broadly how the consulting interviews work. For private equity, I think it's far more exclusive, far more selective. Again, like the global funds, like say like a Warburg or Bain Capital or Blackstone, typically they hire from folks who are already at consulting firms or from investment banks. I think that's the two major pools of people that they look for. And it's quite a competitive process, and the number of people who join are limited. So, I would say not any fund would not hire more than 2-3 people,
right,
in a year. So, and how they approach you is either they reach out to you directly. I think people like Blackstone, you get mails from their HR to, if you're interested in the process, etc. And then there are a lot of these headhunting agencies. They're Michael Page, Native, and they approach you and whether you're interested, and you take it forward.
So do you need to apply to these agencies, Michael Page and Native, or they automatically find you?
So they found my idea and the people in my cohort. I think it's just that they would track people of this profile, non-MBA folks who are at these organizations,
right,
and then they approach you. So I think that's how it is. You don't have to register.
So it's as good as a VC scouting for startups in investing.
Similar to that.
Right.
And probably they have tie-ups. I'm not really sure about that, but they reach out to you rather than you reaching out to them typically.
Got it. And what would be the work process? So basically, they would prefer someone from an investment bank like a JP Morgan, Goldman, or a Morgan Stanley, or someone from a management consulting like a McKinsey, BCG, Bain.
Yeah, I don't think there's a preference that way. I think the people who they pool the resources or they pool the candidates from both these sources. And a lot of my friends who are at private equity firms are from consulting backgrounds. There are folks from investing as well, but I don't think there's a preference within that.
Right.
I would say even if it's there, it's more towards the consulting background. If at least in the recent past or from the immediate circle that I know.
Right.
But
Got
that's
it.
how it is.
And in terms of your work experience at Boston Consulting Group, if you can just help the entire audience understand what exactly is a work of a management consultant and what are you expected to deliver in your modules? It's called as modules,
It's called
right?
modules, yeah.
So what are modules also, you can explain
Sure,
them,
sure.
and like what exactly is expected out of a candidate who is just joining a management consulting firm?
So just to give a overview of what management consulting is, right? So basically management consulting is you are hired to solve a business problem, and this can be anything. It can be you want to grow the revenues of the company, want to improve the margins, or say you want to go into a new market, digitization of your systems, etc. So it can be any problem that the company wants to solve, and there is no fixed profile as such, and your work depends a lot on what the project is, right? So there's no fixed role that way. So for an associate, there is no fixed set of specific industry, or you know to focus on specific aspects of the job. But I think what consulting gives you is an overall broader set of skills in terms of problem solving. Any business problem given to you, I think the skill that you try to develop or you develop over the course of your consulting career is how do you break it down into manageable parts and then think of it holistically, and then you solve specific problems. I think that's like the underlying skill, and then you develop on it over the course of your career in consulting. So I think it's a very dynamic job, especially for people who are not really sure what they want to do, and that was the case for me when I cleared my CA. I wasn't really clear if I want to stay in the audit, tax, what else is there. I think for something like that, consulting is something that gives you a very broad base of opportunities to work in different industries, different kinds of problems, work with really, really smart people. And then that gives you at least some kind of context of, okay, is this something I would want to do? Is this something I would not want to do? And you develop a set of core skills that could help in any job in terms of problem solving, communication, interact with, the CXO level folks on a regular basis. So I think that way, very, very holistic, broad-based experience is what I would say is management consulting.
Got it. So what exactly are these modules when it comes to, like implementing and solving some problem?
Modules are basically sub-parts of the core problem they're trying to solve, right? So again, depends on what is the core problem that is solving for the company. Say if it's revenue maximization, you would probably look at, specific product lines. You want to look at a specific product, and probably that's given to one of the associates. You have someone who's looking at, say, the underlying parameters, operational efficiency of the company. That is something that you look at. So it's basically any kind of business problem that is broken down into sub parts, which is then allocated to members of the team, and then you independently solve it, and then you have a project leader or a manager at the top who integrates the modules for the client. So I think again with consulting, one of the downstream impacts of this is that you are given a lot of ownership. So if you are given a particular module, you are expected to have full ownership of that. There is no hand holding that is given, and that's you're thrown into the fire right from your first day, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. But I think that's how you learn in the most efficient way. People are always there to help, but you are given that complete ownership, and you're expected to deliver.
Right.
So I think that's broadly modules can be anything. For example, if I just take an example of a due diligence, one module would be like the entire market analysis. One module would be company analysis. So
Got it.
It's just parts of the core problem that you
Can you give us some examples of your case studies in BCG which you solved, if you would be able
Sure.
to share?
One of the projects that I worked on was for a cement company, and I think the core problem was increasing the market share. So the module that I had was how do you optimize discounts within the retailers, which will translate into revenue. So as you can see, the core problem is a much broader one. What you get is a smaller part, and then all that is integrated to give a final outcome to the client. So I think that's how it is.
Got it. No, it's pretty interesting. And when you say that you worked on these models, you get to interact with a lot of these businesses.
Correct.
There's always an argument where like a management consultant, his main job is to give advice, but the person is not involved in the business hardcore, the industry, or let's say if you're giving an advice to a cement company, they know in and out the ground reality of cement company. So how are you able to expertise that process, and how is it possible for a consultant to give that kind of an advice despite the fact that the company is already an expert in that field.
Yeah.
You're getting the question, right?
Yeah. So I think it's a misconception or whatever. It's not that you don't do your work completely independently. I think with consulting, what I've noticed, it's a very, very collaborative process. Especially with the teams who are responsible for your module. I think there's a very, very close relationship. There's a lot of back and forth. What you bring to the table is like a first principle thinking. People who are in the industry for a very long time probably might, given that they have been for so long, they're looking at the same kind of things for a larger period. It's always possible that you get used to the way things are done. When you go and you bring a fresh perspective, and that's all obviously debated, right? It's not that I come in and I say that this is what is wrong, you have to solve this. That's not how it works, right? You bring in, you discuss with them, what would happen if we do this. There will be things that they would have tried in the past and it would have failed. There'll be things that they have some apprehensions about. Then you solve those things. So it's a very collaborative process, and which is why I think even clients are very comfortable with it, and it's not viewed typically as someone from outside, like a 24-year-old guy coming and telling, you can't tell me how to run the business when I've been here for 30 years, right? So typically, I think the projects that I worked on, I still have like really good relationship with the teams that I've worked with, and that's how it is viewed. I don't think probably like the first 1 month in the case, there is a little bit of you building credibility. You're a young guy who is
Right.
fresh out of college or fresh out of CA. There'll be some apprehensions, but once you start working, they know that you're good and you want to solve the problem for them, and then there's a lot of collaborative effort that way. So I think
Got it.
that's how it is.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And even let's say after your consulting experience, I'm
Yeah.
sure like there are a lot of good exits which people get, like let's say into private equity.
Yeah.
Some of them venture into entrepreneurship as well. And what was your thought process when you turned into a private equity, and had you decided that you always wanted to get into a PE? What was your thought process like?
Yeah. So again, I was not very clear on what I wanted to do. So I think the whole basis for me to choose consulting was it keeps my options open, and I get to work with really smart people, and I get exposed to different industries, and then I take a decision based on that.
Right.
Private equity or say investing space was of interest to me. Right since my school days. CAs. I think say SFM was my like my favorite subject. So that was always of
Most
interest.
people are going to hate you for this answer. He was my favorite too.
So I think it's just interest, right? Some people just gravitate towards certain topics more. It was always there in the back of my mind, but there was no clear roadmap ki abhi consulting karna hai, and then I know I'll go to private equity in 2 years, and nothing fixed. But after 2 years, the opportunity came. I was like, why not give it a shot? Just to experience. My hypothesis that I try out different things before I choose on what I want to do, and you can't decide on what you want to do unless you go to different places.
Correct.
Right? Whether you want to be a consultant, whether you want to start your own business, whether you want to be an investor, you can talk to people to understand, but nothing gives you the kind of flavor of what the actual job is unless you put yourself in it.
Right.
So it's more of for me, the decision was based on actually going to a sector and trying it out, and then see if I like it or not.
Right.
In the future plan. So that's broadly the reason for me choosing the decision that I took to switch to private equity.
Got it. And just asking the pay structure at like management consulting, if you'd be comfortable, what was the CTC at BCG?
Yeah, I think at the entry level right now, I think there was. I think it's typically between 20 and 25 lakhs.
Got it. This includes variable as well.
This includes variable. I think when you start as a fresher, a non-MBA fresher, I think that's the range. But then I think within 3 years, your CTC reaches close to 45, 50. So I think it's quite a big progression that way.
Right.
Typically, the MBA folks start at a much higher level. The CAs and the graduates start at 2025.
Got it.
So I think that's how it starts. But then, as you grow up, the growth is quite fast at consulting compared to say, in industry that you're working in.
Right. And now since you've taken plunge into a private equity, which is like one of the most renowned private equity funds as well, how is your entire experience in terms of your work profile as of now, and what are like some of the projects which you've worked on which are publicly disclosed, which you would like to tell to the entire audience?
So again, private equity, it's been like 4 months now. Yeah, it's been 4 months. I would say the learning curve has been quite steep. A lot of things to learn every day. And I think in terms of the people that you work with, in terms of how smart they are, I think it's off the charts. I think you probably work with some of the smartest people you've ever seen in this field. And the way they think, I think it's something really inspiring that way. I think a typical, maybe if I can just break down what like a role of a private equity associate is, right? I think broadly 2 buckets, if I can put it that way. One is you look at new deals and opportunities. And this would be probably, I would say, 50-60% of your time would just be looking at different kinds of companies that that are in the market to raise funds. And what that entails is you build a thesis in a space, right? Even before the company comes up with funding, you have certain outside in industry analysis, and any fund would have a thesis on a particular sector. Say healthcare, this is what we think is good. These are the kind of assets that we would target, etc. So there's an outside in analysis that is done on the industry. Then you have certain industry that you want to invest in or you want to play in, and then you do a company level analysis of whatever the companies are looking to raise funds. You do a company level analysis in terms of what is the kind of money they're trying to raise, how have they done, how's the management like. I think probably one of the most important things I look at is the management or the founder backable, right? Because you are embarking on a journey with him over 5 years. So unless you have complete faith, complete confidence that he's the guy to take the business to a new level, the deal is not going to happen, right? So company level analysis is done, and then you do a first level of analysis, then see if it's interesting or not, and then you have something called an investment committee internally, and you take it to them. It's debated whether this is this the kind of asset that you want to play in, etc. And once that is done, then there is like a detailed diligence that happens, and this timelines can vary from 3 weeks or probably 2 months, wherein detailed line by line analysis of done of every revenue, like every revenue line item, every product, every cost line item, you know detailed analysis on the management team, how they have done in the past. There's a legal diligence that happens, commercial diligence that happens, FTD. So that's a detailed process, and then you decide, you go back to them and decide whether you want to do the put the money in or not. So that is one side of it, which again probably I would say very exciting part of the job. Right? You look at different companies, you meet all these founders who've done a great job, right? And then you have the other bucket in terms of the existing portfolio companies that these funds would have, and within that there are two things. One is you try to add value to them, right? Given like a fund like global fund like Warburg, Bain, Blackstone, etc. There's a lot of global resources available, and experience of investing over decades. So that you bring that, help them create value. How do they go from 1x to 3x in 5 years? So that's a value creation piece that happens, and where your core consulting sits also would help. And then you have that whole piece on exit.
Right.
I think investing is one part, but I think exit is probably harder, because you have to find people to buy the asset from you, or go public. So that's one entire piece that would happen. And typical investment horizon is like about 5 years in an ideal case. So I think that's broadly the three major things that you work on. Obviously the kind of things that you work on depends, varies quite a bit depending on where you are with different pieces. But I think these are broadly the three things.
What are the skills which these companies would look for in a candidate? Of course, one would be financial modeling. I was interviewing Divyansh also.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would know him as well.
Yeah.
So he's with Blackstone. And like one of the most important skills which he mentioned was that you should be very good with financial modeling in terms of projecting numbers or just doing an entire exercise. So apart from this, like what would be like your opinion in terms of other skills which these companies look for in a candidate while hiring?
So I mean, I think like you said, I think financial modeling is the single biggest skill that you would have, and it's not that you're expected to know end-to-end modeling when you join. It's just like the basics, and then you get a lot of training within the fund, from people.
How would you define the basics?
You should be able to build a 3-statement model, like a balance sheet, P&L, cash flow, how things, flow into the different statements. Be familiar with concepts like, enterprise value, equity value, IRR. Your corporate finance 101. But you need to be very, very strong with your basics. So fundamentals have to be strong. And then obviously you're not expected to know everything when you join. The learning curve is quite steep. Once you join, a lot of people help you, a lot of resources available.
So what, like, can you give examples of resources as well, since you mentioned that?
Yeah, resources as in, I'm just saying the kind of people, I think it's mainly people working with different, teams within the fund. You pick up a lot, how you think about certain businesses, how you think about, modeling, certain cost line items, revenue items, etc. So I think that way, and I would say financial modeling right now, I think we are in an age where almost everything is available for free on YouTube. I think any skill that you want to learn, you can just go, Google it, and you get like 4 different videos on how to do it. So I think basic financial modeling is a skill that I think that's the core skill which you have to develop, and then it's just you have think, how do you think like an investor? I think that's the core skill. And if you have to invest in a business, and I would say your interviews also typically come around that. You're given a case study, in terms of, this is XYZ company in this industry, do you make an investment or not? And then you ask for details, right?
Right.
Tell me this, tell me that. And then you, develop a thesis and you do that. So I think developing that kind of mindset, probably I would say is, even bigger skill required
Right.
than financial modeling, because financial modeling is something you can learn.
Correct.
It's process, right? But how you think about things, I think that's like a core fundamental thinking that one would have to develop. I think
Right.
these are two things, and then it's just baptism by fire. You have to just get on the job and pick up things and learn.
Correct. And I think even I had mentioned in one of my LinkedIn posts also that, like this baptism by fire concept is so cool, to be honest, because if you're exposed to tough managers during your initial days of your career, it makes you a stronger person. And I think that might really help you in order to grow in your career as well.
Yeah. I would say, the other thing is that, you have to be, willing to learn. Assume that you start at, level 0, right? Given so early in our careers, I think any job that you join, there's a lot to pick up, right? And especially in a high pressure, high fast pacing moving environment like private equity, I think as long as you're willing to learn, I think, that's like the core attitude I think anyone would look for when you join this.
Right. Let's delve a little deeper into the interview process as well. So,
sure.
If you would be able to help both your interviews, okay, let's talk about BCG and then Warburg Pincus, because both of these are like dream companies for people to work with. Like I was rejected by BCG in the final round and I have shared my entire process, but of course it was my dream to get in there, but okay, I couldn't get in. But since you've already got into these two companies, can you help the audience to answer two questions? The first one is, how do they prepare for these kind of interviews firstly? And secondly, what are like general questions which these interviewers ask you in order to recruit in a management consulting or a private equity? If you can give your examples or if you can just help them in terms of preparation, that'll be extremely helpful.
So I think consulting interviews, again, you are not expected to have any base level of industry knowledge. It assumes that you start from ground zero. What they test is, do you think, how is your first level thinking? Ground up, how do you think about problems? It's just first principle thinking, right? I would say that how you prepare for it, typically when you get shortlisted by BCG, and obviously you would be aware since you went through the process, you are assigned a buddy from these firms, and typically they coach you for about a month, wherein they help you, they give you case interviews, and then you practice with them. They guide you towards the kind of books, the kinds of resources that you have to use to imbibe those skills. And then after a month, you have about 4 to 5 rounds of interviews before you're either you're selected or rejected, right? In terms of the skills, again, I think the main thing is problem solving, right? If there is a core problem, how do you make sure that you think about it in a holistic manner while breaking down into individual parts, and then you're able to tackle each one of them. Your modules is basically that, right? You have a problem A which is broken down into 4 subparts, and each of them solve that. So are you able to think in that way? Do you have like a structured way of thinking? Another thing that they probably look for is, how do you communicate? Are you able to communicate your thoughts well? Is it not? Can they put you in front of a client? I think that's one thing they look for. And there's something called an airport test in consulting, at least, is that if you are in an airport and the flight's delayed by 4 hours, would the other person be happy to sit with you and have a conversation with you? So it's just that having a nice attitude in general, because consulting and private equity, for that matter, is all long hours, and unless you enjoy working with your team, you're not going to have an enjoyable experience no matter what the work is, right? So it's just being nice, having a good relationship with those you work with, apart from problem solving and communication. I think these are probably the 3 core skills that they would look for. And again, once you join, there is a learning curve across different dimensions for you to improve on.
Correct. And how was it for private equity, Warburg Pincus?
Private equity, again, like we spoke about, the core skill is like, can you think like an investor? I think if that is answered, everything else is like, process related. Obviously you need to have a base level of modeling skills.
No, but for that, do you have to prepare a PPT and present it to them, or how does it happen?
No, I think it's like a case study, case/case interview. Within the interview, probably a 45-minute conversation that you would have. And, at the beginning, you are given some details saying that, this company, this industry, they're looking to raise so much. What do you think about the company? And it's quite open-ended, and it's a very conversational interview, right? Typically, like if you meet a founder, he's not going to give you like 7 different things and tell you that, what would you do? It'll be a conversation, probably mimicking like how you would meet, management teams in the job. So it's just, once you meet, what are the kind of things that you look for, right? Are you looking at the right things? Are you focused on the wrong things? And obviously you have to make, convey the point that you're thinking like an investor. I think that's the main thing that they look for. And obviously you need to be good with numbers.
Correct.
I think if you're in this job, some level of competency in being good with numbers, in modeling skills, which is like a base expectation, but a lot of people are there. And and especially from like our background, which is like a CA background, I think most people have they're good with numbers, given the fact that we've been 3 years of articleship and all that. But then beyond that, how do you think at a higher level? How do you think like an investor? I think that's what differentiates you from someone else.
I remember for my BCG interview, I used to have a resource of Victor Cheng case interview, and there was a mental mathematics section on his website. So if in case you guys also want to have a look, like it's like caseinterview.com, I think caseinterview.com, somewhat of this sort. You can just type Victor Cheng case interview mental maths, and there were a lot of questions on mental mathematics. So they used to see ki 1 minute mein, like in 1 minute itself, how many questions you're able to solve. And these used to be questions like, like 1 million into 1 million. Questions of these sort, where you have to quickly get to the answer, okay, how much is this, like, or maybe divided by, there are 6 zeros in like 1 million. And divided by 100, so how many zeros would remain? So you should be quick with all these numbers. It's not like 698 into 698, that kind of a mathematics. I'm not Shakuntala Devi to do that.
No, but to be very honest, I was not, or I'm still not very good at mental maths, right? It's just that when you're in the space of after a point, then you start, like a million into million, these are things that you get to know because you've been working with it for so long. Obviously, it helps, you get to answers quicker. When you're talking with people, you're able to process it better. But I think more than that, it's also just thinking about those are skills that you can develop, right? Even during the job, having a base, being strong conceptually and fundamentally, I think that's quite important. These are skills that you can just develop. And that's what I say, like for example, when I was studying SFM, right? I was not studying for clearing the exams. I was genuinely interested in some of the things. I used to go like look at derivations of how these things are coming. I used to watch like CFA videos just to understand derivatives better. Because what is the Black-Scholes formula, right? Our curriculum doesn't cover it in depth, But I think having a genuine interest in the subject, I think that takes you a long way.
Right. It's all about being curious at the end of the day. More curious you are, like you're more able to understand it deeply.
Correct. And I think that comes from interest, right?
Correct.
If you're interested in something, you are curious about it.
Right. Let's also talk about the pay structure at private equity. If you'd be comfortable disclosing your salary to the audience, that'll be helpful.
So I'd say typically for an associate level, the level that I'm, and again, probably I should spread it into two parts. You have your global funds, like Warburg, Blackstone, Bain, etc. And then you have your domestic funds like say Kidara. I think as an associate in the global funds, including variable, you would make anywhere between upwards of 80-90 lakhs, between 80 lakhs and could go up to even 1.2-1.3 crores depending on the kind of variable that you get. The domestic funds slightly lower. I think probably would make about 50-60 lakhs. So
got it.
And with some level of variable. So again, quite it's obscene amounts of money, I would say. But I think one disclaimer here is that the decision to join or any job for that matter, and especially private equity, shouldn't be driven by money. I think at least the stage where like for I am at, or any associate who joins 24, 25, 26, I think it's just more of having a genuine interest, and being curious about the space and willing to learn. The money is a byproduct. Obviously, it's a very, very good byproduct that you're getting. But working long hours, looking at numbers for so many days, staying in a room with these three people, sacrificing weekends, etc. You can't do that unless you actually like what you're doing. I think the benchmark, at least for me, would I take the job if the pay was not what it is and it was the same pay as a BCG or even slightly lower? Would I still take up the job? For me, the answer was yes. And then I took it, right? So I think, would you take the job? Are you taking it just because of the money, or are you taking it because you actually want to, go into that space? I think that was at least the decision criteria for me. Obviously, pay makes an impact. I'm not here to say that, money doesn't matter. But I think at the initial stages, your decision should be driven more by what you want to do, or what you want, explore different things rather than taking a money-based approach.
Right. Let's say like you mentioned around 80 to 90 lakhs is what a person would earn. So what would be the typical mix of fixed and variable in this?
I'd say like Probably 50-50.
Okay,
Broadly
got it.
50-50 would be your fixing rate.
Got it. Makes sense. And in terms of your work-life balance as well, you mentioned that you have to work longer hours as
Yeah.
well. So how are you able to manage your entire personal life as well as professional life? And as of now, let's say like you're into a private equity, but after a point of time, if there's a deal activity which is going on, you have to work like 16 hours, 18 hours,
Yeah.
sometimes even sleepless nights, right?
Yeah.
So how do you manage that pressure and what is your mindset like at that point of time? Do you feel like quitting your job? Do you feel frustrated at times?
Yeah.
I'm sure it must be feeling like that, but how do you tackle that entire phase?
I think work life in private equity is there are few intense weeks, where there's a live diligence going, and there are other weeks where it's manageable, right? You can probably wrap your day by like 7 or whatever. So I think within those intense weeks is where you're really tested, and I think that's where what matters is, do you like what you're doing? If you're doing a job just for the money, and say if you have to work for 17 hours because there's something due the next day, and there's multiple comments that you have to address, etc. I think what takes you through is working with a good set of people that you're comfortable with and you enjoy working with, and you actually like the work. I think that's what pushes you through going through these long hours more than anything. And it's always that once that is done, you can always take some time off and recharge. But this is not something that you can do sustainably unless you actually like what you're doing. I think the core thing again is you need to have a genuine interest in terms of investing, liking what you're doing to manage work life well more than anything. But I think there is you can set boundaries unless it's like a deadline that can't be avoided. You can actively take time off, go on vacations. I think that's possible, being upfront, communicating your life. But within those intense hours, I think what takes you through is like you actually, I should be happy doing what I'm doing,
Right.
and that's what helps you manage those hours.
Right. And how would these typically be? Like, how long would these hours be in the intense phase?
That can be, I think it can be 17-18 hours also.
Got it.
It's
And even
can
sleepless nights.
can be sleepless nights, but
Right.
again, just to like not scare anyone, that's just like a week in every 4-5 months. But that's when you're really tested in terms of
Correct.
do you want to do what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
You also spoke about the fact that MBAs are hired usually at a higher pay as compared to the young graduates. There's a heated argument in terms of like whether doing an MBA opens up a lot of opportunities, etc. or not. So, what are your personal thoughts on it in terms of whether an MBA would add a lot of brand value and get you a very high-paying job versus a person who's developing the skill set of, let's say, financial modeling, being more curious, having that investor's mindset, and then continuing in that firm only to develop more that kind of a mindset, and then like just continuing in that firm. So, what would be your opinion on doing an MBA versus like just continuing your career in the same firm?
So I think probably two parts to it, right? One is the scenario is what it is right now. Like MBAs are preferred or paid higher than typical CA graduates, and I think there's a small percentage of CAs that get access to, and I think that's like a position of privilege that you were a rank holder, and even the opportunity to interview with BCG came because we got a rank, and that's not something that a lot of people get when they clear, right? I think CA versus MBA again in terms of right now, if I look at it on an average, MBAs do earn more than CAs. But I would say the core skills that we have, so for example, when I joined BCG, right, I think I would say the skills that you develop or you have the opportunity to develop over your 3 years of articleship plus what you do in final is, I would say, on par with any MBA graduate, right? I think probably one of the things that people would lack is in terms of communication, because CA being a distance education program, you don't really get a chance to communicate a lot. Obviously, some people do, if you're working in say a big four or any other reputed organization that is also developed, but majority of the graduates don't. So I think that is one. I think the only differentiating factor. But in terms of core skills, I think you're either at there or even better than MBA. So I think from a skill perspective that you had mentioned, I don't think it's a major delta.
Yeah.
But I think just in terms of what it could help is you meeting a lot of really, really smart people from different backgrounds. I think one is that networking aspect, getting different perspectives on, any business issue, right? Or any topic for general. I think that helps, and at least India right now is a place where the brand value of an MBA is valued by organizations, and that helps you get jobs. If you ask me personally, I don't think like a CA is below an MBA in terms of core skills.
Yeah.
At least from the friends that I have, people that I've worked with, I think core skills are definitely there.
Right.
I think it's just then how you refine it and then
Do you think
develop
this
opportunities for
mindset
you.
would change after a point of time that like MBAs, companies preferring MBAs and all?
I think just in terms of volume as well, I think if I just look at say probably tier one MBA graduates versus CAs, I think I'm assuming there are a lot more CAs who graduate every year as compared to tier one, MBA. Like say if I just look at say IIM, ABC, like and just like the top 10 institutes, right? One thing that I think the CA Institute is doing well is I think they're revamping their curriculum. I've not been fully up to date with what it is, but I think there's a lot more practical aspect that's coming in.
Yeah.
That started when even I was giving my CA. I think they are doing efforts to revamp the curriculum to make it more practical and not theory oriented. But I think unless the GMCS or the orientation that we do, I think that needs to be a lot more robust because right now it's just more of a placeholder. Training of sorts. It is getting improved. The institute is taking efforts, but I think that's the core skill that the CA or us as a community should try to develop to be treated on par.
Right.
But I think apart from that, it's just it's a systemic issue that would take time for it to get resolved.
Yeah,
I think,
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So, like, thanks a lot, Arjun, for your time. What would be your future plans in terms of like what is your end goal in life, or maybe what is it
Yeah.
that you would want to achieve after a point of time?
Yeah, there is no end goal. I think that's evolving. But I think I would want to be in a space or do something that I like, and investing is something that I like. Even consulting was something that I liked. And this is just exploring different things. And I think the ultimate goal for me is to more than the money. It's like, do I like what I do? And if that is there, I think I'll be happy at the end goal. And whether that keeps evolving or not is something that time will tell. But I think it's just making sure that I'm working with good people, smart people, and liking the job. I think that's the goal for me.
Right. And one last question which I asked to every of my guests, like one last question which I ask every guest of mine. If you were in the shoes of Kushal and you were interviewing Arjun, what is that one question you would like to ask him at the end of the interview?
This is something we had covered also a little, but I think it's just more of how do you manage your personal life versus your career, right? I think that way sometimes, and again, I think it's just a learning process over a period of time. Been more focused towards career rather than taking care of my personal life, etc. Bringing that balance.
Right.
How do you do that? That's something I'm realizing over a period that equal focus has to be given. But
I think you realize that once you're married as well. Like as of now, you don't have that responsibility.
I think that's a long way out. Not something to focus on right now, but it was just in general,
The next 2-3 years.
There's no timeline for that.
Just kidding. All right, man. Thanks a lot. This was wonderful talking to you, and I'm sure like everyone who's watching this is going to get a lot of insight in terms of what exactly is a private equity management consulting. Everything would get solved. So thanks a lot for your time.
Sure.
Means a lot, and all the best for all your future plans as well.
Thanks, man. Pleasure's all mine.
Thanks a lot.